Korean punctuation. Now, this is not going to be a very in-depth video because punctuation is a huge topic in Korean, but there's some good news. Most of the punctuation in Korean is used the same way as it is in English, with some exceptions. So this video is just really to talk about some of those exceptions, because for the most part, question marks mean a question. Exclamation marks mean that you're yelling something. So most of the stuff works the same, but let's talk about what's different. So let's first talk about the comma. The comma is used a lot less in Korean than you might think. In fact, you don't really need the comma. What does the comma do anyway? The comma tells you to take a break, tells you to pause while you're talking, right? Well, in Korean, how do they do that? They can tell when they need to pause simply by verb endings. For example, if you're doing a sentence, something, 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 하는데, 하지만, anything like that tells the person already that that's a pause. They don't need to separate the sentence into sections because they already know that's where they would pause. But you can use the comma in Korean to separate multiple things where there might otherwise be confusion. So if you were to have like a list of things and you wanted to separate them like this and this and this, well then you could use a comma just like you would in English. Otherwise it would be really hard to read in Korean. You can also use a comma in situations where in English we might prefer to use a period, and that will be whenever you're calling out to someone or quickly replying to someone with two sentences. For example, 네, 알겠습니다. In English, this would be, yes, I got it, or yes, I understand. Well, we might prefer to use it as two sentences. Yes, period, I understand, because these are two sentences. But in Korean, since you're just calling out to someone, you know, hey, you over there, or yes, agreeing or replying to someone really quick, you don't need to use a period here, so they would just separate this with a comma. Even though in English, we would definitely only use a comma within a sentence and a period at the end, sometimes, this is not the official rules, but you'll see commas in Korean used just like they're at the end of a sentence, for someone who's not really too familiar with the correct formal rules for how to write something. So if you're reading someone's quick, essay or something and they're writing in English and they might use a comma instead of a period, that's the reason why. It's that they kind of might not understand the difference between a period, which ends the sentence, and a comma, which should just continue the same sentence. So again, that's unofficial, so if you're writing something, you should still stick to the regular rules, but you might sometimes see the comma used like a period. Next, we have the colon. The colon will have a space before and after it in Korean. So if you were to say something like the date, well, you might think in English we should put the dots right after, but in Korean they'll actually give a space. So you'll see dot, dot here, and then another space before they start writing what the date is, In my opinion, I think it looks really nice to do this, so I kind of get why they do it, but just be aware that you should put a space before using a colon and after. The next one is the period. This can also be used for one more thing in Korean that we don't do in English. That is if you have a date that's written completely with Arabic numerals. So if you were to have the date 2020, remember it goes year, month, date. You can also write it like this. So 2020 period, space, 6 period, space, 15 period, like that. The next one we have is parentheses. Now, there's not a big difference between these in English, but you will also notice a difference with spacing. So in English, we might write something like, let's do blah, blah, and then parentheses after a space. Well, in Korean, they'll put the parentheses right after the previous word without a space, and then they'll write whatever they want to have inside. And then they'll have a space afterward, and then they'll continue the rest of the sentence. But this space here, if what comes after this directly is modifying whatever comes here in Korean, then they will not use the space. So if they were to say, the president said something, something, 라고 했어요. He said, 라고 했어요. Well, this 라고 했어요 would be directly attached to this parenthesis here. Parenthesis, right? One parenthesis. Anyway, it'll be directly attached. But if it's not directly modifying it in Korean, well, then you will add a space. So you can think of it this way. So if you were to have something in parentheses that talks about here, well, what if you were to remove it? Well, then would there be a space here or not? If it's blah, blah, space, blah, well then, yes, you want to put a space. If it would normally be connected, then you don't add a space. So that's just the rule for how to do it. And next, we're going to be talking about quotation marks. These are used similarly to how we do in English. It's used for directly quoting what somebody says. And it's also used for large quotations, like important quotations. So this doesn't have to just necessarily be something that someone says. It could also be used for something that's just like a title, like the title of a movie. You would put it in double quotes like this. And I should also say you might sometimes see this written instead with these sort of arrows. I think they do this in French too. So you might see the quotes written like this. It's the same thing. Now, single quotations are a little bit different. In English, we use these for just making an indirect quote, like he said, go, like that, a quote within a quote. And in Korean, they also do that too. So if you had someone quoting something, you'd use the double quotes. And if they were saying something within their quote, you'd use the single. But it can also be used for making quotations around things that are less important. For example, a section title or just a chapter title of the book, which would have quotes around it, double quotes. Also though, there's one really important difference. Single quotations like this are also used for quoting someone's thoughts. So if you want to quote what someone said, use double quotations. If you want to quote what somebody thought, use single quotations. But we're not done yet. There are a few other interesting quotation things that we don't really use in English, and one of them is a dot. I'm just gonna write it inside of a box so you can kind of see what it looks like, how much space is between it and the other word. A center dot like that. This is something we don't have in English, but this works like a comma when you are connecting two things or more things that are directly related to each other. So you can think of this as being something like 철수, 영희. These two could be considered to go together like part of a set. So 철수 and 영희, you could read it as and. Or items that go together. You can list multiple items that all go together. Do that with this. So in that way, it works like a comma, but it's specifically for things that go together. The next one we have is called the tilde. This one shows that the sound, specifically the vowel sound at the end of something, continues. You can say 반가워요 to your friend, or you can say 반가워요. This just indicates that it goes on. And sometimes, people write a bunch of them or something like that. This just says that this vowel sound that comes before it continues. So it kind of emphasizes like that sound keeps going out. 반가워요, however far out you want to make it. It also has one more use in Korean. That's to show to and from. And this to and from can be both with a time, like from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, or it can be for some sort of location or distance, like from Seoul to Busan. The next one we have is the slash, and I'm not talking about the famous guitar player. This one means per or each. And the way that they write this is different than you might think. 5,000원, so about $5. 장, so each single flat item is $5. Now this is more like kind of like English grammar, like 5,001 each 장, each one, or it could be 병 if you're buying some sort of liquid in a bottle. So it would be written this way, but when you say it, if you were to read this, you would say 한 장에 5,000원. That's how you'd have to read it, but this is how it would be written like that. And last but not least, we have our ellipses. These ones are just used when you want to show some sort of silence. So maybe a character is talking, you'll have the double quotes, and what they say is ... which is nothing. They're just silent. Maybe they're staring or they're confused or whatever. So this one's just used to show silence, or it can also be used kind of like we do in English at the end of a thought or a quote that just shows that you're not done with that. So something continues on, we're not done. There's something else that's going to come after. So in that way, you can also use it just like you use in English. Are there any ones that I missed? Are there any that you're curious about more? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time. 그럼 다음에 또 봐.